I've been lucky to have a series of very good mentors who've been foundational to my success. So go out and seek, learn from people. I actually mentor quite a lot of people. I still have mentors I go to for advice. So I would say, never be afraid to learn, constantly keep learning because our, field is changing by the hour, by the day.
Welcome to the Chief AI Officer or CAIO podcast, where AI mentor Sanjay Puri talks with the leaders shaping tomorrow's technology. We explore their stories, challenges, and big ideas driving change. So if you're curious about how AI is transforming work, business, and everyday life, this is your front row seat to the future. Bharat Prabhakaran is the driving force behind digital innovation at the University of Cincinnati, serving as Vice President and Chief Digital Officer, the leader reimagining how tech powers teaching, research, and student success. A seasonal tech strategist with over 25 years of experience from Oracle to higher ed, Bharat blends bold digital transformation with real impact on campus.
Bharat, welcome to the CIO podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay. Honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
For people aspiring to be in your role, what were some of the defining inflection points where your career could have gone in a completely different direction for folks who want to learn, who want to grow up to be you, Bharat?
I would say it's a series of maybe calculated risks and maybe some amount of luck that have played a part. Like many others, I came here as a graduate student in search of higher education and better opportunities. Because growing up in India, India today is very different from the India of 1980 and 1990. Obviously wanted to do a lot of research in computer science, and we didn't have those amenities and facilities outside of maybe the IITs in India. So came here as a grad student, did my master's degree, was thinking about a PhD, but for various reasons decided not to pursue it. So that was one key decision point, right? That was one decision point of not going down the academic route, deciding instead I could take my talents and to the benefit of the corporate environment. I would say the second big one was, so I started, that was during the .com days in the late 90s. So I was at a company called Razorfish. It was one of these high flying internet startups, that was going to change the world and, .com everything, right? So, and that, only carried on till like 2000 when everything went bust. So, I wasn't let go, but, another key decision point was at the point I was on a visa, right? I was on a H-1B visa, didn't have the stability. And so, felt it was too unstable. So made the conscious decision to move to Oracle, this large corporation, which I felt would provide more stability. I would say a third thing is, a lot of people believe in changing jobs every so often. I would say for people who are in like a large company, I know there are pros and cons, but, the big pro for me was being able to do multiple different things. So in 18 years at Oracle, I think I worked in 4 or 5 different groups. So definitely, the making the effort to consciously upskill and relearn. You don't want to settle into something that's comfortable over 18 years and work in the same role. If you want to sort of be well-rounded in technology, especially, it's important to spend time and doing different things and learning new domains. So I think I worked in product development. I worked in the compliance division for some time to learn, legal. I worked in training, technical training to learn and, upskill myself, worked in cloud digital transformation. So just, made the rounds and learning different things, staying in the same company. I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but that certainly helped me round out my experience. And then finally, I'd say the move out of Oracle to JP Morgan, to me, that was more, just wanting to, get out of the one company mindset and try to explore something different. But honestly, even a few years before I did that, I was already looking at getting out of corporate in general. I felt I wasn't, my friends are joking that I keep joking that I'm having a midlife crisis. It's like you turn 40, some people buy a red Ferrari. I moved into higher ed, I guess. But so, at Oracle, I felt like I was, just a big cog in a machine, right? Like, you're contributing to the bottom line driven decision making. There's not that sense of fulfillment or purpose. And so, so I wanted to move into a domain where I could actually use my skills in a domain that I can make an impact on, student success and so on, right? So I'd been looking to get into higher ed for a few years. So got out of Oracle, did JP Morgan, but it was, again, a big corporation, nothing against them, really great company. But, when I got the opportunity to move to UNT, University of North Texas, that, I jumped on it with both hands, right? So I think the key is to sort of figure out maybe what makes you tick and how does it align with your core values and principles, and how, we all have skills, we could be doing any number of things in the world, right? So you want to be in a domain where you think you're making a difference. So I think I found that in higher education. And then, at UNT, things were going really well, but obviously I was, like you said, deputy CIO, so looking for that, next growth opportunity. So the other thing I will say is you have to be flexible. So learn continuously, be flexible, in as much as this was a big move, right? Moving from Dallas, Texas to Cincinnati, Ohio, where it's still freezing and we have a foot of snow outside. It's just very different kind of lifestyle. So you have to, and it also involved a huge personal sacrifice, because at the time my son was in high school. He was a sophomore in high school when I moved here. So we decided to keep him in Texas with my wife staying there. And so I was living the bachelor life for 3 years. So you got to, make some personal sacrifices as well to get to where you are. So I'd say, continuous learning, calculated risk taking, some amount of luck, and then be willing to, make personal and professional sacrifices. And the last thing I will say is, reach out and build connections, because that's what helps you. In every step of the way, I've had people help me, and connections that I've been able to leverage to sort of for the next opportunity.
So when you move to from the corporate world to the to higher ed, were there things that you had to completely unlearn about technology leadership? And I'm talking about unlearn from corporate world to get into the academic world, not the other way.
Yeah, fair enough, right? So I think the academic world is very different. I mean, in many ways, and also similar in some ways. So I think that the good news is, the technology skill sets are transferable. In some ways, higher ed, for various reasons, and we can talk about this later, is a little behind from a technology perspective. So the lessons you've learned in corporate can apply. I think, to me, the biggest difference in higher ed is, well, the two things. One is it's not most of them, not the private institutions. The public ones are not for profit, right? So you're not really after the bottom line. I think the decisions are more based on student success and outcomes, as opposed to just the stock price, right, or the earnings. I would say the second big thing is higher ed is very governance driven or consensus driven, almost to a fault, and that's one of the things that gets in the way. Is if you've ever dealt with faculty members, they're not afraid to voice their opinions. They have an opinion about everything. They need to be involved in every decision, and so sometimes that kind of gets in the way. It slows things down, the whole committee-based decision making approach, right? So I think that was one thing I had to learn or adapt to, because at Oracle, for example, yes, you have, it's a big corporation, but at the end of the day, most big corporations, the CEO says something, it gets done. So we had this one category of projects we call Larry said so, because Larry Ellison said so. It just gets done. It doesn't work in higher ed if our president says something and people question it or ask questions and push back. And so I think that's the one thing. So I mean, I'd like to joke that everything takes, I don't know, 10 times as long with a tenth of the budget. That's how I look at it. The budgets are smaller, governance. So I think that was the one big thing is, every collaboration, good relationships. You can't just, burn bridges and, fight with people and get things done. It doesn't work that way in higher ed.
One of the big challenges when I talk to chief AI officers on our podcast is the ROI that they have to show either to their board, the CEOs, etc. You are operating in educational institution. For your peers, who we've had some of your peers from the education institution, or for others, because you are a student or a faculty driven organization. So what is the ROI situation for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. At the end of the day, and this is something I'm trying to bring in. The good news is at University of Cincinnati, I have a CFO who also came from a non-academic environment. So he think at the end of the day, I know we're not for profit, but we're still, we operate as a business, right? If we don't, make money, we can't support our students, right? So I think that discipline is slowly getting into education. A lot of different factors are contributing to people waking up, the budget situation, right? The whole funding cuts for research, those are all contributing to pressures where education is realizing we have to operate more like a business, right? We can't just not run. So I think in some ways, there's different buckets of AI, right? The way I look at it, right? I mean, there's AI focused on sort of the academic side of the house, right? So, and we have some metrics for those areas where the ROI is not really measured in dollars and cents, but we have this personalized tutor agent bot that we built using our Bearcat GPT. So there, the ROI is really, how are students learning, right? Is it making a difference in their grades? I mean, so we can measure, student retention, student grades, progress, student withdrawal rates, things like that, right? So I think those are some metrics we use in that bucket. But if you look at it from the corporate perspective, we also have a bunch of operational initiatives that we're running, right? And so there, the metrics are really focused on the traditional corporate metrics, right? So, how much time are we saving, right? Or how much staff. So if for instance, we're doing an invoicing automation project using AI, right? We had a very manual process of how our invoices were processed and delivered. So, for that, the metric is really FTE, time saved, right? Or productivity gain or stuff like that, right? So I think depending on the sort of the bucket that it fits in, we have sort of different metrics. So in some ways, we're similar to corporate on the operational side. On the academic side, it's broader, I guess, more focused on student success.
The research on AI tutoring is mixed so far. I mean, that's what the research is showing. Some studies show gains, some others show students becoming dependent on AI generated shortcuts. How are you designing these tutors to promote genuine learning rather than sophisticated answer getting?
Yeah, I think so. The emphasis on Socratic, right? So this was at our Claremont College, which is one of our branch campuses. We worked with a faculty member. So the problem we were trying to solve is in mathematics, right? Our biggest problem that our first year students have is math failure rates, right? Calculus, and it does a number of them. People just don't get it. They don't do enough in high school. So we were trying to address that was a problem we were trying to address to start with math. So I think the key difference was this is the tutor is not like ChatGPT where you type in something, it just gives you an answer, right? So this will prompt you through a series of questions and then really go back and forth with you to make sure you understand the concept. I mean, so it's not perfect, but it's not going to really just give you the answer overnight. And then we have two levels of tutor for this, the beginner student and the advanced student. I think one's called the Bearcat Study Pal and one's called Bearcat Genius, and the name suggests which is which, right? So the study pal is more a partner where you can sort of converse with, help you understand the different concepts. For example, what is differential equations, right? Or what is integration by parts or whatever. And then the sort of the genius is more, yes, I understand the concepts. Now let's do a series of quizzes or quizlets and so on and so forth, right? So I think it's really tiered based on the knowledge level of the student. But again, the key, the similarity is it doesn't give you an answer. It's not meant to be an answering bot. It's meant to be something that walks you like a tutor would, right? Like help you solve a problem.
Just to follow up, because I'm personally very interested in personalized education, which I think is going to be one of the big benefits of AI. Does it distinguish between each student? Because I might be a little less inclined in calculus than maybe you are. It does kind of recognize all of that institutionally about what I am good at and then works on that. Me, right?
So yeah, it does. So I mean, see, as a student, you log into your instance of Bearcat GPT, right? So you're already signed in. It's still a work in progress, but we want to tie it into our Canvas learning management system and several other systems, right? So then we can really look at the history of the students' grades and bring in some of the data. So that's the vision. We are not there yet. This was the first iteration. Is just the tool is available, but the longer term vision is absolutely personalization based on student profiles, student background, student grades, so on and so forth. Yes.
A lot of enterprise AI platforms either they fail to gain adoption across because of trivial use cases. What's your adoption curve actually looking like, and which use cases surprise you?
The approach we took was, again, to figure out scale and utilization was a pilot, right? So from 24 to 25 was a pilot. So we had about 1,000 users across the university, mostly faculty and staff, sort of kicking the tires, playing with it. So at that point, the adoption was not flat. I want to say it had pockets of adoption, the typical early adopters, like computer science faculty or engineering faculty, and then the others it was less of a less used, I guess. So I think the curve has definitely steepened over the past few months. I think a couple of reasons for that. I think the first is we've done a lot of communication training enablement sessions, going to different pockets of faculty, trying to show them the value of the tool. And many of them have been poking around all these publicly available tools. So the biggest reason we wanted this in place was to make sure that at least the data that they're using from a UC perspective stays within the UC domain, right? I mean, in the sense of, we don't want our research data in the public domain, for example, right? There's IP involved and so on. So I think the adoption, enablement helps. I think, and then the pilot had already started off a list of use cases, and so the second thing we did was we put out a call to the community for use cases, right? We can't innovate from the center; it's got to come from the edge. So we got, I think, like 100 responses from everything ranging to tutoring to operational stuff to digital twin to whatever, right? So, and then we can talk later, but we have a community of practice that helped us sort of filter some of these use cases up to the president and his cabinet, and then there we made the decisions of made these are the 14 that we want to work on. So I think a combination of enablement, access, defining, sitting down with different groups, figuring out their use cases. I think that has helped sort of increase adoption. And now we're going to open it up to students. So, I'm sure the curve is going to just go, crazy, right? Explode. So
you picked 14 out of a large pool of use cases. What is the what is the way that you figure out these are the 14 that should be the ones that make the cut?
So one is focused on teaching, learning, and research. So that's our bread and butter, right? So that's where the focus is how is AI going to be applied in that domain. We have one group faced, and we're very big on responsible AI, so ethical and responsible use of AI. So that committee is focused on that. We have a third committee focused on policies and guidelines, right, which is really important in this ever evolving day and age. It's kind of the gold rush. So we want to put some guardrails in place, ensure our institutional policies are supportive. Finally, operations and enablement, right? So that's where my team mostly plays, is how do we provide the tools and platforms to support the institution to use these. So we out of those committees, we had a subcommittee that was focused on use case review. So members from each of those areas, they came up with a rubric, designed to sort of evaluate these use cases, right? So, and it was like, I think that the first number one thing for us is student success, right? So and there's some sort of evaluation criteria based on, right? Is it going to help a student with their grades? Is it going to help retention? Whatever it is, right? And then we had some operational metrics that were looked at, right? What's the ROI? How is this going to contribute to the institution? So I think the committee came up with a rubric that then used to filter the 80 or 100 or how many ever we got to the 14, right? I think it was more like 20, and then we took it up to the president's cabinet, and they filtered that down. The good news is, out of 100, I think almost 25 or 30 were based on tutoring. Like 25 people had the same ideas, like we need a tutor. This is the sort of best use case. So, but that was the approach. So, rubric from the committee.
Is this based on an existing large language model, Bearcat GPT?
Yes. So Bearcat GPT is just our instance of Azure OpenAI. So we're partnered with Microsoft. For now, it's Azure OpenAI is the primary focus.
Where do you see multi agent systems making the biggest impact in higher education beyond UC? I mean, are you envisioning AI agents that can handle enrollment advising, financial processing, research? I mean, where do you think this is all going to go up? And then obviously, I'm not going to let you off the hook without talking about Molten Book, which is, as you know, right now the very, very hot topic where there is a social network of AI agents that's kind of building every day. But tell our listeners a little bit about your vision for AI agents.
In my opinion, higher ed in general is not fully ready for agentic AI completely, right? So I think, and the reason I say that is the data, right? I think so. Our biggest problem in education, and I'm sure many large corporations, is the siloed nature of data, right? So we have all these data silos or swamps, as I like to call them, right? So and so that's in parallel to our AI efforts, we've actually been focused on another program called Bearcat Insights, which was our enterprise data strategy that we launched about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So we brought in a bunch of stakeholders from across the institution, about 80 of them. We're all data, actively involved in data, and really sat them down and said, what's our future state, right? We need to come up with an enterprise data strategy. We can't be operating like this in these silos, right? So if you think about it, we have student data, HR data, finance data, research, all kinds of data everywhere. So the first step in that has been the building of our lakehouse, a modern data platform. So we've actually just launched that here end of last year. It's built on AWS, Amazon Web Services, and we're using Snowflake and Informatica, among other modern tools, to enable us to sort of get our data together. So we're in the process of bringing all our data, in there, making it a single source of truth, putting some governance around it. So I think back to your question, the biggest challenge we have in education with this agentic, AI and workflows is the fact that our data is not ready, right? So I think that would be an important first step in the process. So where do I see it going? I think to your point, enrollment is a great use case, right? With sort of human in the loop, but minimal human in the loop. I mean, that you could have these fully autonomous agents just talking to each other through the entire enrollment workflow, from admissions to, I don't know, housing to financial aid to, so I think that's one big use case. The other one would be on the operational side, on the whole financial back office, HR, kind of space. And then probably a third use case would be in the advising, the tutoring. We have academic advisors, right, for students to register for courses, and integrations with our learning management system, and so on and so forth. So I think those are maybe three broad buckets. But in my opinion, at least we at UC are not ready, and I'm pretty sure many of our peers are not ready, even though they may claim otherwise.
Let's take UC, just ballpark. How many years do you think it'll be before you think UC would be ready?
I mean, so we're already going to do it. That's not going to stop us from not doing it with limited use cases. I'm just saying for a broad adoption of agentic AI, right? So we already do. We have, like I said, we have 70 or 80 individual agents that people are little. Some are little for their personal work. Some are broader, right, and so on and so forth. I think for broader adoption, I'm going to say we're not that far away. Like, we will continue to make progress on it while we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So we will continue to build agents where applicable for sort of a broad, full, sort of environment of it. I'm going to say maybe a year to 2 years, 1 to 2 years, or even less if we can get our data, story straight here. So the goal for this calendar year is to bring in pretty much all of our major source of data into our lakehouse. So once we have that and put sort of Bearcat GPT on top of it or other tools on top of it, I think we will probably be in a really good shape to make progress maybe next calendar year, is my guess.
Is concern about data, Bharat, just that it's in silos, or it's also that you're dealing with student data, which is very, very ultimately very sensitive, and you got to make sure all kinds of guardrails are put in place for that.
Yeah, thank you for. I think that's the other missing piece is the whole governance of the data, or like yes, it's a combination of all those things. I think one is the siloedness of data, the quality of data, right? Because you have all these swamps with questionable data, if you will. And then the second piece is the compliance and regulation. So in addition to FERPA, which is the student piece of protecting the student data, we also have healthcare. We have a health. We have an academic health system. So there's obviously HIPAA compliance rules and GLBA for financial aid, and there's all kinds of compliance regulatory requirements. So I think it's a combination of making sure we have the guardrails for the valid and protected use of that data, in addition to the fact that the data is not clean and it's kind of disorganized, I guess.
I had this chief AI officer of one of the largest employment companies in, I would say, in the US or at least in the world. They have over a million people. And they said that from the time an employee joins till the time they leave, that employee is given a dedicated AI agent that stays with them for their HR benefits, the payroll, the this, that, everything. Couldn't you see something like this for a student's 4-year journey through the process?
Absolutely, 100%. Not even through the process, but even alumni. So we try to, at the end of the day, when our alumni are our biggest fundraisers, they donate back to the institution. But yes, I mean, that's the vision, is you can have a life cycle companion that keeps your ties to the university, right? So yes, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm happy to learn more about it and work with our colleagues here.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. You are using Azure right now. One of the questions that came from a user for you was that there are many different rapidly evolving models. You have, I mean, GPT 5.6 or something like that. Then you have obviously Claude 4.6 just came out, and then you have Gemini. How do you make model selection decisions for a platform like yours? That's what one of your peers wants to know, how to make that decision.
I think so. The goal here is, we are not tied into a particular platform. I think GPT-5, I mean, Bearcat GPT happened because we had really good partnership with Microsoft. We saw that, that was where the most interest was with OpenAI when it first came out, right? But we quickly realized that there's, Anthropic, Claude is catching up. There's Grok, there's Gemini, there's, you name it, right? There's new models all over the place. So our goal is really to make all these tools accessible to our users, right? And so we have like I said, the enablement community of practice committee is the one that looks at the different tools and evaluates them, assesses them. But our vision is really to Bearcat GPT's this umbrella platform, right? So right now it's just Azure OpenAI, but we will plug in other pieces. So we're already in the process of working with a partner to have a hybrid environment that allows, again, a pilot. We'll start with a pilot use of many of these other platforms, right? And so we want to make sure that these tools are available to our stakeholders. And then, once we have that pilot done, we'll roll it out to everybody. So our vision is really to make it accessible, because we're not a corporation. We don't have to settle on one platform. Our goal is to make things available, especially for research, give them all the different options, right? So the goal is to make all these available under the Bearcat GPT platform over time.
Bharat, one of the things, and I want your opinion on this, is AI is a great tool for students to learn. So internally, obviously, as you said, it'll help with your students for improving their math skills, etc. But also marketable skills in the workforce. But also there is this other issue specifically that you have to deal with that is impacting the workforce today, where people, because of the use of I just heard that Claude is now being used at places like JP Morgan to do legal compliance work, etc. So, I mean, you think about the vibe coding and things of that nature. What is your perspective in terms of, obviously, you want your students to walk out with, as you said, great learners, but also great marketable skills. You're in a little bit of a kind of a very interesting situation to figure out. So, for our listeners who are trying to figure out, where to go, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question at this time, right? So we are significantly being disrupted by AI, as you rightly said. I mean, if you at least here in the U.S., as all the software stocks took a hit because everyone thinks AI is going to do a number on that domain, right? So I think so. We realize, and so just to touch upon a broader sort of thing that's impacting higher education, we have what we call the enrollment cliff or the demographic cliff, right? So it really is where the number of 18-year-old typical college student eligible kids are not graduating anymore because in 2008, I guess people decided not to have kids during the recession. So we I guess at least the U.S. wide, there's a significant drop off in enrollment that's supposed to happen this year, starting and for the foreseeable future, right? So we're already taking a hit there from that. We have some issues here, impacting international students coming in. So overall, I think we've been wrestling with this, impact to our enrollments even before AI, right? And sort of the skill sets and the jobs of the future. So I think the thing we've done, and our president is visionary in this regard, is he realizes that upskilling is equally important, right? You want to provide platforms and avenues for people to learn new and marketable skills, and not just for the typical high school graduate college student, but people who are in the workforce, have been impacted by layoffs and so on. So we have what we call Skills at UC. You can look it up. It's our platform for upskilling or continuing education. So we actually established a college for continuing education and professional studies, and so there's a dean that's overseeing some of that and trying to look at micro credentials and other ways that people can sort of skill themselves up. And in parallel, we work very closely with all our industry partners here, trying to figure out what are some of those skill sets that you want in this AI world or post AI world or whatever it is, right? So we try to gather that input from them. So obviously I am involved, but more from a technology perspective with our provost and our chief innovation officer and others. So we have this committee that's really looking at what are some of those skill sets that corporations will need. And in some ways, it's sort of a crystal ball kind of thing, right? 15 years ago, nobody knew the cloud jobs or some of the jobs that would apply, right? So it's sort of evolving with the times. I think we're down that path. We don't really know yet, but we're trying to put the pieces in place, building a platform, bringing those micro credentials and certifications, because we realize that not everyone in AI needs a degree for everything, right? You may need, certain kinds of skill sets for certain jobs and so on. So I'm going to say it's probably a process, a work in progress at this point.
So it's a work in progress that we don't know. But as you said, there is an enrollment cliff coming up for some of your peers who are in educational institutions who are dealing with this. What capabilities do you think that they should be looking at? Should AI play a big role in how they upskilling executive programs or work skill programs? What should they be looking at?
Again, not at the risk of generalizing, many in higher education are probably faced with similar challenges. So obviously, the demographic cliff is one, but the skills that you have within your organizations, right? So many of in higher ed, for better or worse, there are people who come in for the mission and they stay for the mission. So you have people who've been here 20 plus years in many organizations who maybe don't want to evolve, or if they do, they don't have the skills in this world of the future. So it's critically important to think about your organization and how you can upskill them to meet the challenges. I'm going to say you have to embrace AI for the most part, at least from an operational efficiency perspective, because we're all constrained by budgets. In higher ed has always had constrained budgets compared to corporate, for example, right? Historically, IT has been viewed as a keep the lights on, operational arm by most leadership within higher education, right? Because they just see it as a utility, right? It's only recently with the COVID, especially, I think exposed how important technology was to the success of an institution. So I think now people are embracing it more as a strategic digital partner that can actually help you drive transformation to some of the outcomes. I'm fortunate to have a visionary president that I report to that sees that. So I think, but that being said, your budgets are still going to get constrained over, due to various other economic challenges. You have to ensure that things like AI and fundamentally, I'm going to say more process automation opportunities, because COVID helped us do a lot of that. But I think there's still so many things that are inefficient, within our organization, within higher ed in general, that can benefit from process automation and AI to an extent. So I think twofold. One is embrace the tools for operational efficiency. The other side is upskill your staff, because otherwise you won't have the people to do this work, right? And that's where, so one of the things we've done creatively is use our students. So we realize we have gaps. So we're big employers. At any given point in time, we have over 100, 150 students working for my organization alone, right? And so for some of these new initiatives like enablement, community of practice, and so on, we have multiple student workers for security. We use their skills, give them jobs. And you see, we call ourselves the home of co-op, or the internship co-op concept. So we it works well on both sides. Right? Students need a co-op. Right now, the job market is not great outside, so we sort of bring them in and say, hey, do the work for us, and we can use your creative skills, and while we train our current staff.
The other thing you have emphasized, and I want to make sure that you still believe it applies, is the people, process, technology. That's your mantra, so to speak, your framework. Do you think that still you stand by that even in the world of AI, where people are going technology, people, and then process?
Yeah, so I mean, two scenarios for AI, right? One is the Terminator. I know you and I are old enough to remember those movies, where AI just takes over the world and kills everybody. Or B is, the movie Wall-E. I don't know if you've seen that, by Pixar, where people just get fat and lazy, and robots are, lying on a couch, and robots are running around serving them, right? So unless we get to that point, to me, I still stand by the mantra. I think in any big digital transformation, and to me, AI is another moment in transformation, right? If you think about the history, it's the internet, then it's got the cloud, and then we've got AI from a technology perspective, or the iPhone, I guess, and the technology, it sort of evolves. And yeah, I think that people skills are still important, right? I mean, until AI gets to that whole, what do they call it, AGI, right? We're not quite there yet. So I think the people are still going to be critical, critical thinking, some of those things that people bring to the table. And in any big transformation, people are, to me, the biggest challenge, because they have these mindsets that you need to shift, right? I mean, to me, technology is easy. You can implement technology, but if you don't have the people and then the process supporting it, you're not going to go anywhere, and you'll fail. So even in the world of AI, I still firmly believe that where we stand today, it's still people, process, and technology, in that order.
What would be the top three skills for someone like you who's leading, making AI enabling your organization? What would be, for our listeners, the top three skills they should have?
I mean, the number one skill, and this applies to any organization, is as a chief AI officer or chief digital officer, you're leading some kind of change, right? So I would say the number one skill is connect with your stakeholders, right? One things we as technologists do is maybe make decisions for the sake of technology, or because it's cool, right? And I've been guilty of that in the past, and those don't go very far, because if the users don't get the whole we FM, right? What's in it for me? Or how is this going to, like the who moved my cheese, right? You're moving their cheese. So why are you moving their cheese, right? It's important that you make them understand and build those connections with your stakeholders. So I think that's a critical skill to have. And, it's something you have to make a conscious effort to do, because as technologists, we are not typically that. And I'm not going to generalize, but many technologists are introverts for the most part, right? So you have to get out of that and try to connect with your business units or the leader, in the different areas. I would say that's number one. Number two is communication. Just constant communication. It's not enough to set a vision. You have to constantly reinforce and sort of sell that vision. So it's like really talk about AI within their context, right? So you can't just go to a finance person and talk about use cases and marketing or something like that. Right? You have to be able to talk to the individual and show them how AI is going to benefit their unit. So I would say those are the top two. It's the people side of the house. And then obviously go through a structured change management process. I think we're being pretty methodical in the community of practice. We were trying to establish governance. We have forums where we go and communicate in town halls and so on. So I'm going to say that's to me, any big change, that's how you sell it, make it successful.
So, people, ability to change, ability to communicate, I think those are, I noticed you didn't say anything about technical skills or any of those, because what are those? Those are table stakes, basically.
Yes. To me, technical skills at that level, at the C level of anything, is table stakes, right? I mean, there's a certain level of competency that is assumed. And if you don't have it, then it's quickly found out, and then you're out the door, right? So to me, that is, your understanding of technology and to be at the forefront of is expected at that level from the leadership. And they're really bringing you in to show them. And I would say the third one thing I forgot to mention is always tie in the success of your initiative to a strategic business outcome, right? So in our case, our strategic direction is next lives here, right? So that's what we live by. Our president and our board have established that so that really means we want UC to be the center of innovation, student success. We have several, you can go Google next lives here UC and you'll find a whole, multiple web pages on it, right? So what we've done is try to tie in how these AI initiatives are going to support Next Lives Here, or the different pillars of Next Lives Here. And that's important for every organization. I'm sure you have a strategic plan to tie in your outcomes to the successful outcomes for the plan, right? And how does it support the plan?
Bharat, one point you mentioned, last point I want to talk about is in terms of reporting, how important is it not just for you or in education, for a leader who's leading this massive transformation? Who should they be reporting to generally?
So in academia, and then I'll talk about corporate because I've been in both. I think in academia, the typical scenario for a CIO or someone in this role, is usually three. One is you report to the president or the chancellor, whatever the title is. The second is you report into the sort of the CFO or COO, the chief operating officer. And the third is the provost, who's the chief academic officer, right? So I think each has its sort of pros and cons. I mean, reporting to the CFO, historically, at least, you're viewed as a cost center, right? And then it's always about efficiencies in IT. So that's not really ideal. On the academic side of the house is very focused on just the academic outcomes, and people forget that you're still running a corporation, right? You have a business to run. So I think the sweet spot is reporting to a president who actually understands the value of technology like ours, and so there, it's semantics, but my title is chief digital officer, right? It could have been chief information officer, or but it's for a reason. The president believes that digital transformation is foundational to our Next Lives Here vision. So I think in academia, to me, that's the sweet spot. And I would say it's probably the same applies to corporations, right? I mean, there's similar models of COO, CFO reporting, and or maybe in some places I've heard it reports to marketing, which to me is crazy. And then the CEO. So I think just having a seat at that executive table, or if you're not directly reporting maybe to a chief of staff, but still having a place on the cabinet or whatever the structure is called, is to me critical, especially for something like AI and these big transformations, because you need a leader who can understand the value of it and not have it filtered through a different lens based on who you report to.
Do you think the board or whatever equivalent of the board is at your university is interested in the implementation of AI at the university?
100%. Yes. I mean, our board of trustees is what it's called, is very involved. I mean, we have leaders from various businesses across, the area, and who've had, different backgrounds and paths that they've gotten, but many of them see the value of technology. So, I mean, the president does a periodic readout on, our progress at the different board meetings. We have an audit and risk committee that, that I, present to along with my CISO on a regular basis. So they're very interested in it. So I'm going to say, yeah, they're fully embracing and see the potential of it, but they also want us to be methodical and careful, and and so on, right? So our board for sure is behind us and completely interested.
Oh, that's fantastic. Bharat, towards the end, we have a lightning round of questions trying to put you a little bit on the, I won't call it the hot seat, but little bit on the warm seat. Cloud or on-prem?
Oh, good God. I'm going to say cloud, even though I think people are questioning it. But yeah, go ahead.
Open source or proprietary AI?
Open source.
Okay, since you brought up data lake house or a data warehouse?
Lakehouse, the kinds of data we have today, yeah.
Silicon Valley or Silicon Heartland, as you call yourself?
Yeah, the kind of house I have here in the Silicon Heartland, Silicon Heartland.
Let's make it a little more interesting for you. Ohio State or Cincinnati football?
Come on.
Don't you have a kid? Don't you have a kid at Ohio State?
I do have a kid at Ohio State, yes, but my paycheck is being delivered by the University of Cincinnati.
Remember, you have to go home too. But anyway, that's all. I'll leave.
Yeah, and I have to pay his tuition.
Yeah, that's
so yes.
true. You have to pay his tuition.
Yeah.
Okay, synthetic data or human generated?
It depends on the use case, but I'm still going to go with human generated.
Yeah. Human generated data. Okay. Finally, if you were to give one last point to aspiring AI leaders, what would that be? Someone who wants to follow your path, just give one actionable item that they can do.
The key thing is, learn and be flexible. I'll just leave you with that, right? I mean, don't set yourself a path and then say, you have to adhere to it. It's important. A lot of people do this visioning and journaling and write down the 5-year, 10-year goal. And I've done some of that in the past, right? But it never quite works out exactly the way you plan. So I think just being flexible, taking the opportunities that come your way, constantly learning and upskilling yourself. And then, I would say connect with people, right? You are as good as your network. And, so find a great network, make a conscious effort. Don't just go out and reach out to people. And so, you are on LinkedIn, I'm sure you get these connections, and the next minute they're trying to sell you something or whatever, right? So that, to me, that's transactional. People don't value that. Make conscious, deep connections. So, and, then if you need to leverage that in the future, you at least have the connection and the history to go and ask for a favor, for example, right? And the second part of it is find mentors, right? I've been lucky to have a series of very good mentors who've been foundational to my success. Go out and seek, learn from people. I actually mentor quite a lot of people. I still have mentors I go to for advice. So I would say, never be afraid to learn, constantly keep learning, because our, field is changing by the hour, by the day.
If our listeners want to have a mentor, just very briefly, what should they look for in a mentor?
That's a great question. I think so. Pick a mentor who sort of complements, or, in your opinion, if you, has skills that you want to learn from that, right? So it could be it could be technical, it could be non-technical. Someone who's obviously ahead in the journey where you want to be. So if someone wants to be in my role, then I would pick a mentor who's in my role, right? So if you're not in my role, so I mentor a lot of, people who are associate vice presidents or, level down me, or where I was at UNT, for example, deputies and so on and so forth. And then, pick, and, it's sort of a process. It's like, I would say it's like picking a partner almost, maybe not that much of a critical life decision, but it's, you have to have a couple of initial meetings to align with values and see if sort of their, skill sets align with yours, right? So I'd say it's a process of matchmaking too, right? So I've had mentors who've we've talked to each other and decided it's not the right fit for us. So I'm going to say alignment with your values, sort of where you want to be on your journey, and sort of, connection, right, at the end of the day.
Thank you, Bharat. This was fabulous. I could have gone on and on and on, but you have actual work to do, unlike me asking you all these questions. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the CAIO Podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.